On my last high school football game, my coach asked me, "I know you can't walk, but can you give me one last tackle?" "Coach, I think I have a concussion." My words came out slurred and everything looked foggy. "Then you can kiss college goodbye, you big black sissy." He stood up and walked away like he hadn't just threatened my entire future. I'd taken a brutal hit in the third quarter, the kind where you hear the crowd gasp and everything goes silent for a second. My bell had been rung hard, but I'd stayed in because that's what coach forced me to do. This was the championship game, and scouts from 3 colleges were in the stands. Everything I'd worked for since middle school came down to these last 8 minutes. My head throbbed with each heartbeat. The pain started behind my eyes and spread like fire across my skull. When I tried to focus on the scoreboard, the numbers wouldn't stay still. They floated and merged together like they were underwater. My stomach churned, and I had to swallow hard to keep from throwing up right there on the sideline. My legs felt like jelly as I tried to stand. The stadium lights seemed too bright, and there were 2 scoreboards instead of 1. But I had to get up or else coach would do those bad things to me again. My teammates started chanting my number. The crowd joined in. Even through the fog in my brain, I could hear them screaming, 23! 23! The sound made my head feel like it might explode. Each chant was a hammer hitting an anvil inside my skull. I gripped the edge of the bench trying to steady myself, but my hands were shaking. Sweat poured down my face even though the November air was cold. Something was seriously wrong, but I couldn't let anyone see how bad it was. My girlfriend Marlene broke away from the cheerleading squad and ran over. She was saying something, but her words sounded underwater. I just wanted her to touch me good. I could see her mouth moving and tears on her face, but couldn't understand what she was trying to tell me. She grabbed my arm trying to keep me on the bench, but I shook her off. Her face blurred into 3 faces. 3 Marlenes all crying and pulling at me. I blinked hard trying to make them merge back into one person, but it didn't work. My brain couldn't process what my eyes were seeing. Everything was broken and wrong, but I kept moving toward the field because that's where coach wanted me. The trainer hadn't cleared me to go back in. He'd been checking my pupils with a flashlight when coach called me over. Protocol said I needed to go through concussion testing, but coach didn't care about protocol when championships were on the line. He cared about winning and the trophy and his reputation. I stumbled onto the field and everything tilted sideways. The yard lines weren't straight anymore. They curved and danced like snakes, but I lined up in my position anyway because that's what warriors did. That's what coach always said. Warriors played through pain. My knees buckled when I got into my stance. The field rushed up at me, then backed away like ocean waves. I had to put my hand down to keep from falling over completely. The defensive coordinator was screaming plays, but the words were just noise. Nothing made sense anymore. All I knew was I needed to hit someone when the ball moved. The quarterback called the play and I tried to focus. My job was simple. If their running back came my way, I needed to stop him. 1 tackle. That's all coach wanted. 1 last hit to seal the game and secure my scholarship. Easy. But it wasn't easy. My vision kept splitting and merging. The ball snapped and time slowed down. I saw the handoff happen in slow motion. The running back turned the corner heading straight for me. This was it. My moment. I planted my feet and launched myself forward with everything I had left. But my body didn't respond right. My legs pushed off at different times. My arms reached for a player who wasn't where my broken brain thought he was. The world spun in 3 different directions at once. I missed completely. He juked left and I'd gone right, diving at empty air. My body hit the turf hard and I couldn't get back up. The stadium went quiet except for a ringing in my ears that sounded like a fire alarm. The impact sent lightning through my skull. I felt something pop inside my head like a balloon bursting. Warm liquid trickled from my nose, and I knew without touching it that it was blood. My arms and legs wouldn't respond to commands anymore. I was a puppet with cut strings lying broken on the 50-yard line. I was on my back when faces started appearing above me. My teammates took off their helmets one by one, and I'll never forget their expressions. Wesley looked horrified. Ayan turned away immediately. Keon actually threw up right there in his helmet, making chunky sounds that echoed through his face mask. Marlene pushed through them and dropped to her knees beside me. Tears streamed down her face, smearing her eye black. She was screaming something, but I still couldn't understand. Everything was just noise and pain and confusion. My parents appeared next. My mom's hand felt cold on my face. My dad was yelling at someone and pointing at the sideline. Even through the fog, I could hear Coach Bartlett in the background. The kid sucked a bag of D's anyway. He said it loud enough for everyone to hear. Those words cut through the confusion like a knife. After 3 years of giving everything to this team, that's what I was to him. The trainer finally arrived with a backboard. Paramedics surrounded me, asking questions I couldn't answer. How many fingers was he holding up? What day was it? Did I know where I was? As they started to strap me down, I used every bit of strength left to raise my hand. I pointed straight at Coach Bartlett, who was already walking away from the scene. Call the police. On him. Backboard. 3 days later, Paula Gaines called my parents to set up a meeting at the district office. My head still pounded every time I moved, but I had to be there. The conference room smelled like old coffee and printer paper. Paula sat across from us with thick folders spread on the table. She explained the investigation would take weeks, and they'd need statements from everyone who saw what happened. A man in a gray suit sat next to her, taking notes on everything we said. Paula introduced him as the district's lawyer, and that's when it hit me that this wasn't just about getting Coach in trouble. The school was already protecting itself. The lawyer kept asking about my medical history and whether I'd ever had problems with authority before. My dad's jaw got tight, but he stayed quiet. Paula said they'd interview the trainer and other players, but warned us that people might not want to talk. She handed us forms to sign that basically said we understood the process could take months. The lawyer made sure to mention that Coach had union protection and 20 years of service. My mom squeezed my hand under the table. That night, Marlene came over after my parents went to bed. She crawled into my bed and held me while I shook. The words came out broken and scattered, but I told her about the times Coach made me stay after practice, how he'd lock the equipment room door, how he'd say I needed special training to be tough enough for college ball. I didn't tell her everything, but she understood from how my body tensed up that it was never about football. She cried into my shoulder and promised we'd fight this together no matter what anyone said. Her tears felt hot against my neck. The next morning, my parents drove me to the police station to file a formal complaint. My hands shook so bad I could barely hold the pen. The forms asked for dates and times and specific details that my broken brain couldn't organize. Detective Corcoran sat with us and helped me work through each question. He said we'd also need to file with the school district separately. 2 different systems meant twice the paperwork and twice the questions. I signed my name at the bottom, knowing this would change everything in our small town. People would pick sides. Some would hate me for going after their winning coach. There was no going back now. Detective Corcoran scheduled another interview for the next week, using special techniques for head injury victims. He had me close my eyes and walk through events slowly. When I lost words or forgot details, he waited patiently without pushing. He asked about patterns of behavior going back to freshman year. I told him about the equipment room and the late-night texts and how Coach would grab players in ways that didn't feel right. The detective wrote everything down and said he believed me. He explained investigations like this take time because they need to build a solid case. He'd interview other players and look for similar patterns. Meanwhile, Dr. Schneider ran more brain scans and balance tests at the hospital. The results showed damage in 3 areas that controlled memory and processing. She created a recovery plan with physical therapy twice a week and cognitive exercises every day. The headaches might last months, she said. Any additional hits to my head could cause permanent damage. No contact sports for at least a year, and maybe never again. She printed out pages of restrictions and accommodations I'd need for school. My football career was officially over. 2 weeks after the game, Paula called a press conference to announce Coach Bartlett's suspension pending investigation. Within hours, the coaching union released a statement calling it a witch hunt. They said Coach was scapegoated for doing what coaches have always done to win games. The assistant coaches started a petition to reinstate him that got 500 signatures the first day. Former players posted on social media about how Coach made them champions. Nobody mentioned the players who got hurt along the way. Someone leaked screenshots from a group chat where people said I was ruining the team's season for attention. They called me soft and said I couldn't handle real football. The posts spread through Instagram and Snapchat within hours. Marlene saw them first and posted a fierce response about what she witnessed that night on the field. She wrote about watching me collapse and seeing blood come from my nose and how Coach walked away calling me names. Half the cheerleading squad unfriended her immediately. She lost her spot on the competition team, but she didn't take it down or apologize. She kept sharing the truth even when it cost her everything she'd worked for. Her loyalty meant everything when I felt so alone. The trainer finally broke his silence and wrote an official statement for the investigation. He detailed how Coach ordered him to stop the concussion check and clear me to play. He included dates of 3 other games where Coach overruled medical recommendations for injured players. One kid played with a separated shoulder, another with a knee that needed surgery. The trainer had documentation for all of it in his medical files. His courage to speak up gave me hope that maybe someone would believe us. The school district released their own public statement full of legal language about following due process and maintaining their tradition of excellence. They talked about Coach's contributions to the community and the importance of not rushing to judgment. Between the lines, they made me sound like a troublemaker trying to destroy a good man's reputation. My dad read it 3 times, then had to leave the house to avoid putting his fist through the wall. Mom found him in the garage, hitting the punching bag until his knuckles bled. A woman named Talia Riddle from the Title IX office called to schedule an intake meeting. She explained her investigation would cover both the medical negligence and the implied sexual misconduct. She walked me through what to expect, including interviews and evidence collection and possible hearings. The process felt overwhelming with different timelines and standards of proof. She said Title IX investigations typically took 60 to 90 days, but could go longer. I'd have rights during the process, including an advisor and access to support services. She gave me another stack of papers to read and sign. 2 days later, Dorian Webb sat across from me and my parents at our kitchen table with a folder full of papers and a laptop showing State's campus. He pushed his glasses up and spread out academic scholarship forms while explaining how I could still attend State even without playing football. The team manager position came with a small stipend and access to all the academic support services athletes got. He showed me the sports medicine program and said my experience could make me a great trainer or physical therapist one day. My mom kept nodding and taking notes while Dad stared at the scholarship amounts that were way less than what a football scholarship would have covered. Dorian said if I maintained good grades and showed leadership as a manager, more financial aid could open up later. He talked about other former players who took this path after injuries and now had successful careers in sports management and coaching. The meeting lasted 2 hours, and when he left, I had a stack of applications to fill out and a deadline 3 weeks away. That night, my parents stayed up late in the living room, and their voices carried through the walls. Mom wanted to handle everything through lawyers and keep my name out of the news to protect my future career options. Dad slammed his hand on the coffee table and said the whole town needed to know what that monster did to me. Mom worried about me being labeled forever as a victim, while Dad said staying quiet, let Coach keep hurting other kids. They went back and forth for hours with Mom crying about protecting my privacy and Dad pacing the floor, talking about justice and accountability. The argument got so loud that neighbors turned on their porch lights and I heard car doors slam as someone left the house. 3 days later, I sat in Dr. Schneider's office for my regular therapy session when she asked about memories from before the injury. My hands started shaking as images flooded back of Coach calling me into the equipment room after practice. He'd lock the door and stand too close while talking about how my scholarship depended on being a team player in every way. His hands would grip my shoulders, then slide down my arms while he described what happened to players who didn't cooperate with the program. The threats were always mixed with promises about my bright future if I just did what he needed. Dr. Schneider handed me tissues and wrote notes without pushing for more details than I could handle sharing. She said trauma memories often surface during recovery, and we'd work through them at my pace. After therapy, I went through my old phone looking for anything that might help the case. Screenshots of text messages from Coach filled my camera roll with timestamps, showing he'd message me at midnight, demanding I come to his office early before school. The messages used controlling language about owning me and my future being in his hands. One text from last year said, "I better not tell anyone about our special meetings or he'd make sure no college would touch me." Another warned that my parents would be disappointed if they knew what kind of player I really was. Detective Corcoran came by that afternoon to collect the screenshots and add them to the evidence file. He sat at our dining table going through each message and asking when and where they were sent. His face stayed professional, but I saw his jaw tighten, reading some of the worst ones. A week later, Detective Corcoran called with news that made my legs go weak. Another former player from 2 years ago had seen the news coverage and come forward with his own story about Coach. The kid had transferred schools junior year, and everyone thought it was for academic reasons, but really, he was escaping the same abuse. Detective Corcoran couldn't share details, but said having multiple victims made the case much stronger. He mentioned the other player was willing to testify if needed, and had kept evidence too. Knowing someone else survived this and found the courage to speak up made me feel less alone and crazy. Paula scheduled a mandatory team meeting the next Monday about player safety and new reporting procedures. I heard from teammates who still talk to me that she spent 40 minutes explaining consent and boundaries while half the team checked their phones or whispered jokes. The seniors who'd been with Coach longest rolled their eyes when she mentioned the investigation. Some players walked out early claiming they had class, even though everyone knew they were protesting. The team was splitting between guys who suspected the truth and guys who refused to believe their hero Coach could do anything wrong. Wesley texted me that night saying the locker room was tense with players arguing about loyalty versus doing what's right. Marlene came over crying after cheer practice because the coach pulled her aside with a warning. She'd been told to stop posting support for me on social media or lose her captain position for creating drama and dividing the squad. The coach said the cheer team needed to stay neutral and support all athletes equally without taking sides in personal matters. Marlene turned in her captain badge right there and walked out of practice with her head high. She felt terrible that I'd cost her something she'd worked years for, but said protecting me mattered more than any title or position. Several other cheerleaders unfollowed her that day and stopped inviting her to team hangouts. 2 weeks after the injury, I tried going back to the school but lasted only 3 class periods. The fluorescent lights felt like knives in my eyes, and the hallway noise made my head pound so bad I threw up in the bathroom. Kids stared at me in the halls and whispered about whether I was faking symptoms for attention. Teachers spoke extra slow, like I was stupid now, and kept asking if I needed to see the nurse. The counselor found me crying in a stairwell and brought me to her office where we worked out a modified schedule. She arranged for me to attend classes in the resource room where lights were dimmer and noise was controlled. I'd take tests in a quiet space with extra time and could leave class if symptoms got bad. The next day, the academic committee met with my parents to create a formal plan. They reduced my course load to 4 classes instead of 7 and gave me extended deadlines for all assignments. Homework that normally took an hour now took me 3, with all the breaks I needed. Reading more than a few paragraphs made the words blur and swim on the page. Math problems that I used to solve in my head now needed to be written out step by step or I'd lose track. The committee said I could still graduate on time if I passed everything, but suggested summer school as backup. Small wins like finishing one worksheet felt huge when my brain fought against every bit of focus. That Friday night, an Instagram message popped up from an account with no profile picture or posts. It said, "I better drop the complaints against Coach or things would get worse for me and my family." The account was created that day, and the username was just random numbers and letters. My dad wanted to drive around town looking for whoever sent it, but Mom called Detective Corcoran instead. He came over within an hour to screenshot everything and start tracing the account. He said threats like this were common in cases against popular figures and usually came from supporters, not the accused directly. My parents talked about pulling me from the school completely and doing online classes from home. Detective Corcoran said to document everything and vary my routine so I wasn't predictable. The fear of not knowing who sent it or what they might do made me check locks twice and avoid being alone. My parents started taking turns driving me everywhere, and Dad installed security cameras around our house. The anonymous message made everything feel more dangerous and real. 2 days later, Talia from the Title IX office called my mom about setting up protections while the investigation continued. She came to our house with a thick folder and spread papers across the dining room table, explaining each form we needed to sign. The no contact order meant Coach couldn't come within 50 feet of me or send messages through other people, including his assistant coaches. She worked with the school to change my class schedule, so I wouldn't have to walk past the gym or football field anymore. They moved my locker to a different hallway and gave me a parking spot near the main entrance instead of by the athletic complex. These changes felt small, but walking through school without worrying about running into him made breathing easier. The next morning, a reporter from the local paper called our house asking for a comment about Coach's suspension. My parents had already hired a lawyer who told us not to talk to any media yet. The reporter kept pushing, saying she wanted to tell my side of the story, but Dad hung up on her. That Sunday, the paper ran a front-page article about how the team was struggling without their head coach. She mentioned my injury in one sentence buried in the middle, but spent 3 paragraphs talking about Coach's winning record. The whole article made it sound like I'd ruined the season by getting hurt. Mom canceled our subscription that same day. Dr. Schneider called with a referral to a specialist who worked with patients dealing with both head injuries and trauma. The therapist's office was 40 minutes away in the next town over, but Mom said distance was good since nobody there would know our business. During our first session, the therapist taught me breathing exercises for when the headaches got bad. We worked on ways to handle the flashbacks that hit me out of nowhere. She showed me how to ground myself by naming 5 things I could see, 4 I could touch, 3 I could hear, 2 I could smell, and 1 I could taste. After 3 weeks of sessions, I started having more hours where my head felt clear than foggy. The progress came slowly, but each good day gave me hope. Detective Corcoran arranged for me to do a forensic interview at a special center designed for victims. The room had soft chairs and dim lights that didn't hurt my eyes. The interviewer was trained to ask questions without leading me toward any specific answers. She let me take breaks when I needed them and never rushed me through the hard parts. I remembered more details than I thought I would once the pressure was off. She asked about specific dates and times, and I could actually recall them clearly. At the end, she told me I was doing really well considering everything my brain had been through. The trainer showed up at our house one evening with a manila envelope full of printed emails. He'd gone through 3 years of communications with Coach and found a pattern. One email from last year showed Coach calling him a pussy for trying to bench a player with a separated shoulder. Another one threatened to get him fired if he didn't clear a kid with obvious concussion symptoms. There were dozens of messages showing how Coach were ignored medical advice over and over. The trainer said he'd kept everything because he knew someday it would matter. Detective Corcoran added the emails to his growing evidence file. The school board meeting that Thursday turned into a circus. Parents packed the auditorium, and the public comment period went on for 2 hours. Some people said I was brave for speaking up about player safety. Others said I was soft and destroying a winning tradition. One man stood up and said maybe certain types of players just weren't tough enough for real football. Dad jumped out of his seat, and Mom had to grab his arm to keep him from going after the guy. Security stepped in, and the board president called for order. They said they were monitoring the situation carefully and would follow all proper procedures. Nobody seemed satisfied with that answer. Dorian called me after the meeting to clarify his offer since my football future was obviously different now. He said state would give me academic scholarships to cover tuition, and I could work with the team in other ways. Maybe as an assistant helping with play analysis or working with younger players on technique. There was no promise I'd ever play again, but he thought my knowledge of the game was valuable. He said leadership came in different forms, and mine could inspire kids who faced similar struggles. I told him I needed time to think, but really I was already accepting that my old dreams had to change shape. Over the next week, I sat at my desk every night writing down everything I remembered. The document grew to 20 pages of times Coach crossed lines. Writing helped organize the chaos in my head and made the memories feel less scattered. Each sentence I typed felt like taking back control of my own story. Mom brought me soup while I worked, and Dad would check in to make sure I was okay. They never pushed me to share what I was writing, but knowing they were there helped. Marlene came over on Saturday when my parents went grocery shopping. We sat on the couch and she brought up how things had changed between us physically since everything happened. She'd been patient, but we both knew the abuse had messed with my head about being touched. I couldn't explain why sometimes her hand on my arm made me flinch or why kissing felt different now. We talked about boundaries and taking things slow and checking in with each other. She said she'd wait as long as it took for me to feel safe again. Neither of us knew if things would ever go back to how they were before, but at least we were being honest. Talia called that night with news that made everything bigger than just my case. She'd been digging through injury reports going back 5 years and found dozens of concussions that were never properly documented. Players who got their bells rung would be back on the field the next week with no medical clearance on file. The pattern showed systematic cover-ups to keep the team at full strength. Parents of former players started calling the school, asking about their son's old injuries. One mom said her kid had headaches for years after graduation, and now she wondered if there was a connection. My case had opened a door to questions nobody wanted to ask before. The whole town was starting to see that winning had come at a price paid by kids' bodies and brains. Talia called Monday morning to schedule the formal Title IX hearing for the following week. She came to my house that afternoon with a thick folder and sat at our kitchen table explaining every step of the process. I wouldn't have to be in the same room as Coach, but would testify through video link from another office. She said I could have a support person with me and showed me the list of questions they might ask. The preparation felt harder than any training I'd ever done for football. She walked me through the timeline and what evidence they'd present, including the trainer's emails and my medical records. My hands shook as I signed the papers agreeing to testify. Mom made coffee while Dad paced around the kitchen listening to every word. Talia explained that the panel would be 3 trained professionals from outside our district who didn't know Coach or me. She said to stick to facts and specific incidents, and not to worry about remembering every detail perfectly. The whole meeting took 3 hours and my head was spinning by the end. That week dragged by slower than any I could remember. I tried to focus on my online classes, but kept thinking about what questions they'd ask. Wednesday night I couldn't eat dinner, and Thursday I threw up twice from nerves. Friday night before the hearing, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My phone screen hurt my eyes, but I opened the Notes app anyway and started typing. I wrote about why I was doing this and how scared I felt, but also how I needed to speak up. The words poured out about protecting other players and telling the truth no matter what happened. Marlene called around midnight, and we stayed on FaceTime until dawn with her just being there while I tossed and turned. She didn't try to make me feel better with empty words, but just stayed present. Sometimes she'd tell me random stories about her day to distract me. Other times we just sat in silence watching each other through our screens. When the sun came up, she told me she'd be waiting outside the building during my hearing. Monday morning arrived too fast and too slow at the same time. Mom drove me to the district office while Dad followed in his truck. My stomach churned as we pulled into the parking lot, and I saw news vans already there. We went in through a side door that Talia had told us about to avoid cameras. Inside the hallway, Coach's lawyer stood near the main office and started walking toward me. Dad stepped between us immediately, while Mom grabbed my arm, pulling me the other direction. Talia appeared from nowhere and told the lawyer he was violating the no-contact order. 2 security guards moved him away, while my support team surrounded me. The lawyer kept trying to say something about dropping this for everyone's sake, but nobody was listening. I realized standing there that I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. These people had my back and would protect me from him and his lawyers. My legs felt stronger walking into that conference room, knowing my team was behind me. The hearing lasted 4 hours with breaks every 30 minutes for my head injury. The panel asked about specific incidents, and I told them everything I remembered about the championship game. They wanted details about Coach ordering me back onto the field and ignoring the trainer's medical advice. I described the fog in my brain and the double vision and how he called me names when I said I was hurt. They asked about the pattern of behavior, and I told them about the equipment room incidents without going into graphic detail. The trainer testified by phone, and his emails were entered as evidence showing Coach's history of overruling medical decisions. My medical records from the hospital proved the severity of my brain injury and how playing made it worse. When they asked if I had anything else to add, I talked about the other players who were too scared to come forward. I left that room exhausted but proud that I'd told my truth without backing down or changing my story. Detective Corcoran met with me and my parents 2 days later at the police station. He explained that the criminal case would focus on child endangerment and harassment charges because those had the strongest evidence. The sexual assault allegations were harder to prove without physical evidence or witnesses, even though he believed me. He said Coach could face up to 3 years for the endangerment charge if convicted. It wasn't the justice I'd hoped for, but at least there would be some accountability for what he did. He showed us the case file they'd built with statements from multiple players and parents. The evidence showed a clear pattern of Coach putting winning above player safety for years. Paula called that Thursday to tell me Coach's suspension was now indefinite pending the investigation outcomes. She said the district was reviewing all athletic safety policies and would require independent medical staff at games. The changes wouldn't help me, but might protect future players from going through what I did. She admitted the district should have done better and apologized for the system that failed me. Dr. Schneider scheduled my final neurological evaluation for the following Monday. The tests took all morning with different scans and cognitive assessments to measure my recovery. She sat me down afterward with the results spread across her desk. The scans showed significant improvement, but also permanent changes to certain areas of my brain. She said I couldn't play contact sports for at least 12 months and possibly never again safely. The grief hit me fresh, like hearing it for the first time, even though I'd known this was coming. She reminded me that accepting limits was part of healing and that I'd already shown incredible strength. I called Dorian that afternoon and officially accepted his offer to attend state on an academic scholarship. He said I could work as a team manager and help with recruiting while getting my degree. My identity was shifting from player to contributor in a different way than I'd ever imagined. It didn't feel like total loss anymore, but more like finding a new path forward. That Friday, one of my teammates, a junior named Tyler, texted asking if we could meet. He came to my house and sat on our porch looking at his shoes. He apologized for not standing up for me when everything happened. He admitted being scared of losing Coach's favor and his own scholarship chances. I understood that fear, because I'd felt it too for 3 years. I told him it wasn't too late to do the right thing if he knew about other incidents. He nodded and said he'd think about talking to the investigator. Marlene came over that weekend and we had a long talk about next year. She'd been offered captain position for senior year, but decided to step back from competitive cheerleading. She wanted to focus on her mental health and our relationship instead of competitions and practices. We were both learning that some things mattered more than trophies and titles. We were choosing each other and our well-being over what others expected from us. My parents started going to this therapist downtown every Tuesday while I stayed home doing my online coursework. They'd come back with red eyes and tight smiles, and we'd eat dinner without talking about what happened in that office. After 3 weeks, the therapist wanted me there too, so I sat between them on a brown couch that smelled like old coffee. She had us do this exercise where we each wrote down our biggest fear about my situation on index cards. Mom wrote that she was scared I'd never be the same person again. Dad wrote that he wanted to hurt Coach Bartlett with his bare hands. I wrote that I felt like I'd let everyone down by not being strong enough. The therapist collected our cards and spread them on the coffee table, and we all just stared at them for a while. She helped Mom see that Dad's anger came from love, and helped Dad understand that Mom's caution came from the same place. We did these sessions for 2 months, and slowly our dinner conversations got easier, and the house felt less like a pressure cooker about to explode. A reporter from the state paper called Paula Gaines about doing a story on player safety, and she asked if I'd participate. My lawyer said we could control the narrative if we were careful, so we agreed to one interview at a neutral location. The reporter met us at the library conference room with just a recorder and notebook. She asked about the game and the injury and the investigation without pushing for details I wasn't ready to share. I stuck to facts about the concussion protocol being ignored and the pattern of putting wins over player health. She asked what I wanted people to know, and I told her kids needed to understand their brains mattered more than any trophy. The article ran 2 weeks later with the headline, "When Winning Costs Everything," and included statistics about teen sports injuries. Other parents started reaching out through Facebook saying their sons had similar experiences with coaches pushing through injuries. 3 weeks after that article, Talia called with news about the Title IX investigation. She said they'd found Coach violated 7 different policies, including player safety protocols and maintaining appropriate boundaries with students. The evidence showed a pattern going back years, but they couldn't prove the worst parts of what he'd done to me. Coach submitted his resignation letter before the board could vote on termination. He wrote some garbage about being persecuted for demanding excellence and how soft kids had gotten these days. The district accepted his resignation with the condition he couldn't coach in our district ever again. It wasn't the justice I wanted, but at least he was gone and couldn't hurt anyone else here. Detective Corcoran called the next morning saying the prosecutor offered Coach a plea deal for reckless endangerment. If he took it, he'd get 2 years probation and have to complete 100 hours of player safety training. He'd also be banned from coaching high school sports in our state for 5 years and pay a $10,000 fine. My dad wanted him in jail, but the detective explained this was better than risking a trial where he might walk free. Coach took the deal at his court date wearing a suit that didn't fit right anymore. Some people in town said we'd ruined a good man's life over nothing, while others said he got off too easy. I just felt tired and ready for it to be over. The school board held an emergency meeting about new safety policies and actually did something useful for once. They voted to require independent medical staff at all games who had complete authority over player safety decisions that coaches couldn't override. They created an anonymous reporting app where players could report injuries or abuse without fear. Every coach in the district had to complete 40 hours of concussion protocol training before the next season. Paula called it the most comprehensive reform package in the state and said my case had created real change. The Youth Football League asked if I'd talk to their players about concussion symptoms and speaking up about injuries. I met with 3 different teams over the summer in small groups of 10 or 12 kids. I showed them my brain scans and explained what a concussion felt like without getting into the scary parts. I taught them the signs to watch for in themselves and teammates. One kid asked if I wished I'd never played football, and I told him I loved the game, but wished I'd known my brain was worth protecting. Several parents thanked me afterward and said their kids had started being more honest about how they felt after hits. 6 months after that night on the field, I drove to the stadium at sunrise when I knew it would be empty. The groundskeeper was watering the grass and nodded at me but didn't say anything. I walked to the 50-yard line where I'd collapsed and just stood there breathing in the morning air. My headaches had faded to maybe once a week, and the fog had mostly lifted, though some days my brain still felt scrambled. I sat on the grass and touched the spot where my blood had been and made peace with this place that had been both my biggest dream and worst nightmare. August came fast and suddenly it was move-in day at State. Mom and Dad loaded the car with boxes and drove me 3 hours to campus. Marlene had transferred to the college 20 minutes away and helped carry my stuff up 3 flights of stairs. Dorian met us at the dorm and gave me my team manager polo and explained my duties would start with recruiting visits. My room had a view of the practice field and I hung pictures from before everything went bad. That boy who dreamed of playing college ball was gone, but I'd become someone who spoke truth when it mattered and found a different way forward. All right, that's gonna wrap it up for today. Really appreciate you hanging out and going through all those questions with me. It's always a good time just wondering about this stuff together. I'll catch you in the next one. Subscribe for more content like this.